just let each panelist introduce themselves and what they do.
Great. Hi. Hi, everybody. Lights are really bright up here. My name is Ryan Balarjan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the founder at Grass Riots. I'm a technologist, digital strategist, campaigner, fundraiser. And I'm not an AI expert. So, yeah,
Who is?
We'll find out.
I don't know. I'm Ben Childers. I'm the founder of Strativation Partners, which is a new firm that started about 6 weeks ago. Really excited to be here. I use he, him pronouns. Like Ryan, I'm a technologist. I'm trying to dabble in, trying to be a futurist and an ethicist all at the same time. So it's been an interesting ride the past year or so as I kind of jump into all of that. And I'm also not an AI expert.
I guess I'll also say I'm not an AI expert. I do spend a fair bit of time looking at it. I work primarily with Amnesty International Canada, but I've consulted with various different organizations over the years. I have a background primarily in digital fundraising and communications, member engagement. I have a side hustle, is fundraisingwithai.com, where I'm sharing what I'm learning about AI and for nonprofits and particularly for fundraising. But I think we're all learning about how this works. So yeah, that's where I live.
Fantastic. Thanks, folks. So we all have at this point come in contact with AI. We've all talked about it. I know last year we had a few panels on AI, and it was an interesting time because it was the OpenAI, the letter that went out asking for a halt on all AI development. And I am here to report that there was no halt on the AI development, even by the individuals who signed the letters. So that's an interesting revolution there. So that's a little bit of background on this panel, as well as, AI in general. So I would love to hear from you, Ryan. What's your hottest take on AI?
This is my favorite question to ask. So you may all get trapped at this conference with that exact question. And so I'm going to say I'm an AI skeptic, pessimist. And I was, for the first time a year ago, I would say, not jumping aboard the AI train very quickly. I think AI is one of the best and most recent examples of capitalism run amok. What I see with AI is a commoditization of intellectual property, a theft of intellectual property, and disregard for social contracts in terms of the expectation of how the internet works and functions. One of the challenges that I see is that AI is, if you would have asked me a year ago, the questions were all like, where are you in the AI adoption curve for your organization? Where are you in the development of controls and policies for your organization? And various organizations being at different stages of that and having a conversation about what to do next. And I feel like since then, we've all just been standing on a train track with the train fast approaching, and it's about to run us all over. So my hot take is that it's too late. There is no such thing as stopping that train. That train is running full speed into our organizations, into our lives, into the software that we use. And we are going to be forced to adapt whether we want to or not. Internet searches for how to disable AI have reached their maximum peak. And right now, I can't foresee a future where that's even going to be possible. Where IT systems are going to be able to control our access to AI tools, or where they're going to be able to control where our data goes. And that is the capitalism run amok. That is what these organizations are counting on. That's where I'm coming from.
Wow,
that's my hot take.
That was a lot. That was a lot. But that was good. You touched on a lot of considerations for organizations, the ethical side, the human side of it. How are we telling these stories? And, if you're telling a story and you're including all the authors of 20 different stories into one story, like who owns that? And these are ethical and creative points to consider. And I think I was talking to you, Ryan, when you first got here in 2012, when I first started my career at PETA as a content producer. I remember it was around Halloween time, and MIT came out with a Twitter bot that would tell a Halloween spooky story. And I thought, oh God, like this is spooky beyond belief for me as a content producer who was writing content and creating this content. And now I'm seeing a Twitter bot just tell a story. But then I read it and I was like, this is the worst story I've ever heard. So my hot take on it, and of course I'm going to get into Ben and George's, is I don't necessarily think an individual will be replaced completely by AI, but they could potentially be replaced by somebody who uses AI to do their job more efficiently. But that of course doesn't address the ethical concerns and all the bigger picture things. So I will take it to Ben and hear what his hot take on AI is.
Yeah, I guess my high take is I want to make sure that products aren't the thing that we're arguing about and trying to put up parameters and guardrails around, and that we're really thinking about the underlying technology and its ethical impact on society as a whole. And I think what ends up happening is lots of people get in these conversations about like chatbots and do they have feelings and like what can they do, and like that is just like a product that a company created that uses underlying pillaged data. Even if it didn't use that, it's still just like a product at the end of the day. And I think there's a lot of like conflation around because it was the first thing that was like productized and it was shiny and it was customer facing, right? And so I did a really great, my wife runs a senior center back in the US, and I do like a technology session every quarter on a Tuesday evening, and they had me come in to talk about like AI, just like explain AI, right? And it was really great to like sit there with like 30 people who the average age was like 77 of, and talk to them about the difference between like a narrow AI, which is like a ChatGPT style thing, a strong AI, and then kind of what we may get to like the singularity, like on the far end of things. And just like talking to these people, and even getting from them, I had them all raise their hand if they bought a VCR in the first year of the VCR being available. And there was one person out of 33 who raised their hand, right? Because it was a new technology. It was a brand new thing, right? And then you ask them like how many of them had tried a large language model end product, right? And it's half the room has done it as well, right? And so the exposure and adoption like of products is also something that's driving and I think conflating some like the ethical issues that we're running into. And so my hot take is make sure you're not assuming that a product is actually the thing you need to think ethically about and what the underlying model and technology is.
Yeah.
All right, George, you're up.
I'm more of an optimist. I don't know if we're on a scale here. I think what gives me optimism is that we're having conversations like this, and that a lot of the interactions I have with people working in nonprofit space around using AI start with, we have these concerns. This is, we're hesitant. We're trying to think about this carefully. And when I think back to, because I've been around for a while in a few different tech waves, when I think back to the internet, social media, mobile technologies, my general memory from those is we all thought it was great. Facebook is going to be great. It's going to make the internet all about people, and we're all about people, and it's going to be just the best time ever for nonprofits. And yeah, clearly we're really completely wrong on that. But I think, and I hope that we've learned from some of those previous cycles, and that we're having these kind of conversations now. Like imagine if we had this kind of conversation before we all jumped onto Facebook and built huge lists that trapped us there. We don't, a lot of the technology that we use now, we don't like it. And we wish it were different. And maybe if we are really proactive in getting in there and helping build it, maybe we can make it better. So that's what gives me optimism. But yeah, I think I have some days where it's quite pessimistic as well.
It's a range. And I think it's allowing us to have, like you mentioned, have these conversations and see the nuance in every angle and side. So in that sense, it's good. So George, going back to, your optimism, how can you get started using AI in your daily work? And I mean, would you recommend a daily usage, or what is your thinking there?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of us are using it. I mean, this is probably quite a narrow crowd of really tech-friendly users. But I would just say, like, everybody, have you tried using ChatGPT in your jobs? And keep your hand up if you've been really satisfied with what you got from it. I think we're at that stage right now where we're all trying to learn what this new tool is about, and it's not like anything we've used before. And somebody said to me, I have to learn that it's not Google, that I don't just ask it a question and get an answer. It's a chat thing. You interact with it. It's like interacting with some sort of intelligence. I mean, it's not actual intelligence, but it appears to be. But so I think just spending some time trying it out and trying some different prompting techniques. I just posted a blog with a bunch of just ideas for fundraisers, some getting started prompts, another category is kind of like help me plan prompts. So go into it with this idea, help me plan. I have this task, help me plan what I need to do. And then you can get more wisdom, a more valuable response from that. And a really great one is this kind of ask me questions prompts, where you say, I'm working through this problem. So here's a description of the problem. So ask me 10 questions to dive deeper into this. I will answer them, and then you give me a summary back of what I've said. So you kind of reverse the role. Have it ask you, make you think. And these kinds of techniques can help you learn what works for you. Yeah.
And I'll say the thing that I also talk to folks about is I'm sure you all read all the terms and conditions on every single thing that you ever use, right? There we go. I do think this is one of those places where really understanding what the data controlling, data processing parameters are that you are signing up for, how it's shared, how it's used. Is it part of a trained algorithm? Is it not? Does it remember you? Does it not? I mean, this is one of those places where, 20 years ago when we all signed up for Gmail, we had a clear understanding that oh, right, we're signed up for Gmail. It's a free service. They're going to use our data to show us ads. And I'm okay with that trade-off, right? But that was at this level, and what you could potentially be talking, and sharing with, a large language model could be much more robust than that. And so really understanding what the privacy concerns are around what you're sharing.
It's a great campaign for Mozilla or Consumer Reports. If anybody wants to just tell them, that would be awesome.
I'm available to be hired, I think now. I think that's I'm supposed to say things like that. Is that right?
Share that one.
I think you both are hitting on a really interesting point, though, the conscious usage of the technology versus potentially a passive use of technology. When you go on Instagram and Facebook, those, and you're scrolling, it's called the infinite scroll, right? That was designed by a technologist to get you to do that. The behavioral psychology behind it was by a psychologist. I think his name's B.F. Skinner. You can look up and see. And it's essentially actually what Claire was talking about from Care 2, this idea that you're on a constant quest to fill your brain with answers and finding and learning. It's kind of going back to evolutionary biology and hunters and gatherers. And now I'm using my anthropology degree for once. Yay! But I think it's being really mindful, especially in a world right now where we're so distracted. And how does one set those parameters within themselves? And then going back to the ethics and thinking about organizations, how do you set that on an organizational level? So on that note, Ben, I'm going to ask you, on the ethical side of things, how do we shift from static ethics to dynamic ethics that match this digital age? And perhaps maybe we should get a precursor on what this shift is.
Sure. So kind of going back to what you were just talking about when it came to Instagram. So, one way to view the infinite scroll, right, is that it's valuable. The other way is to think of it as you're being manipulated to continue to scroll, right? And so we would, if we're thinking about, ethics kind of in a classical way, kind of in any of the frameworks, anytime that you're manipulating someone, that means that they don't have the full access to information that you have as the agent, which means they actually can't respond and make what you'd consider a free choice or a real choice, right? So you can't stop scrolling because it's designed for you to not stop scrolling, right? So you're being manipulated in that way. And what that means is that you're being utilized by that company as as a means but not an ends, right? And so they're devaluing the fact that like you're a human like on the other side of that interaction with like the platform. And so we want to think about how can we kind of, as we move into a more dynamic digital age where we're kind of inundated by these different, AI models that may be, predicting certain values and directions that we need to go. That balance between being manipulated into doing something and freely choosing to do something is that line that as you're designing, and if you think about, I think a lot of you here are kind of in that design capacity, whether it's, UI design, UX design, whether it's content, design, event design, really kind of understanding, as you're doing that, right? Design in some way is an expression of an ethical foundation. Right. And so if you're not really sure kind of the ethical framework that you're using to deliver whatever it is, the service that you're delivering, the event you're delivering, the content, the UI, right, you could potentially be in a spot where you're using people as an ends instead of an ends and a means. Right. And so really thinking about it in that perspective can allow you to start to like shift your thinking to be adaptive into a digital age.
Interesting. So then, Ryan, on the marketing side, knowing all the things that Ben has just mentioned, how are you as a marketer going to use that knowledge as well as potentially, future advances in AI to drive forward the messaging that nonprofits are trying to achieve?
So I think this, I'll come at this from, one of a couple angles. One of the things that interests us is how there's a changing demographic. And last time we spoke about AI, months ago now, 6 months, who knows, a long time ago now. I had a statistic around what percentage of university students were graduating with significant use of AI in their studies. And it was around 60%. I have to imagine that that's a hockey stick curve, or that's going to be approaching 100% in the next, within a year. And that means that universities are going to be adapting their programs and their education to accommodate the use of AI. And we're going to have a whole cohort of people entering the workforce who rely on AI for their work. And our organizations are going to be adapting to that change. The platforms we use all have AI tools, right, associated with generative AI, language being the first approach. The advertising platforms we use are all based on AI and using AI. They have for years. It's been invisible to us. That means a radical shift, a radical change in the workforce and the tools that workforce needs to succeed. And we're in an industry, in a sector that's slow to adapt to change and historically slow. It means that we're going to struggle. There's going to be a disconnect. There's going to be disruption, and we need to find a way to break that divide. And having more conversations about technology in our organizations, more conversations about the support that people need to learn technologies, to engage in those technologies, to build the controls for those technologies in our organizations is, again, it's not a wait and see what happens. It's a fast approaching train. So we're going to feel that pressure significantly. And it's going to be up to our leadership to adapt to that as well. And we know it's hard to have conversations with leadership around technology because the money and the resources are vital. And so I think conversations around that are important. Building working groups, connecting with peers at conferences like this, sharing information, having these conversations. What's challenging us? Learning from each other. It's going to be more and more important, especially as we're in this in this world of hybrid and work from home, where these opportunities are fewer and fewer.
Yeah, that you hit on a lot of points there. And one of the things that I'm thinking of, and perhaps this is a Ben question, but thinking about an organization, do you think these changes are a bottom up or a top down approach?
So generally speaking, when you're thinking about like culture and people shifts, those only happen if you're properly sandwiching your approach to doing that sort of work. You need bottom up pressure and you need top down recognition for any real change to happen. So if you're at an organization and you have leaders and you have a set of values and you have leaders and you see them acting and purporting and speaking those values constantly, and you're seeing that, and then from the bottom up, if you're seeing that same thing where people are acting in a way that are aligned with the virtues, and there's this nice kind of like culture iceberg where people talk about artifacts, values, and basic assumptions. And those basic assumptions are the hard things in organizations to change. But that's where culture shift really happens, is in that place that's buried underneath the water. And so what does it look like to shift basic assumptions? And you have to have that entire organization on. And what'll happen is you'll get like an individual that will try to make a lot of change. And as long as that person is around, and I'm sure you've probably all seen it, lots of things happen. But if nothing has been built out around that person, then as soon as that person is gone, everything just collapses back in on itself. And you're probably even further back than what you were. And I don't know if you kind of want to kind of pull a bit from there, George, and kind of thinking about like at a nonprofit and just designing that like bottom up and top down approach for culture change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sandwich, whatever is a metaphor, image is a good one. I think that what's missing is the kind of the top slice right now is that even talking in even seeing the crowd here, people using AI, probably I'm guessing about half of you at least are probably using it a bit secretly, not telling not officially endorsed. And that's kind of the way it's happening. So the bottom slice of the bread is there. This metaphor is going to fall
great.
apart.
No, it's not. It's not.
But
no, we're going to eat it later. So it's fine.
But I think what's missing is leadership on this, and it's very understandable because this is in many ways kind of presented as something like dynamite. It's new and dangerous, and it's going to explode. And don't touch it. Stand away from it. A lot of the concerns, which is like it's good that we're cautious, but it's leading to this kind of really imbalanced outcome. So, like as hard as it is, I think that the next real step needs to be in the hands of nonprofit leaders to really get some kind of some approach around it that will work. It will involve risk and uncertainty. But it's not the first time we faced kind of new technologies and shifting things. So we do have like a lot of the practices that are necessary. They're in place already. We have data privacy, whether we have policies or we have approaches, we have communication guidelines. Like I think one of the messages that hopefully nonprofit leaders are able to get to is we trust our staff. We trust the people we work with, and we want to endorse them to go ahead with this and explore it because we need to learn it. We can't sit and just read about AI and wait. We need to get our people in there, learn from it, develop the policies, and so having a really flexible approach, I think, is really going to be critical. Going back to, as Ryan said, this new wave of people coming into our offices and workplaces. They're going to be like, what? I can't use ChatGPT. How am I supposed to work?
I think, George, you hit on something really interesting is this idea of trust. And trust with AI, there's a lot of layers to it. And especially since disinformation is evolving out of AI and evolving out of the use of AI and how humans are using it. It's not just the technology, right? It's humans as well. Most recently, an example I'm thinking of is Katy Perry. There was a photo of her at Met Gala created by AI, and her mom was just like, I didn't know you were going to be there. You look so great. Katy's like, oh, wow. Even my mom is getting duped by AI. Like, if my mom can't tell what I look like that's scary. And there's been tons of stories out about that sort of stuff. But how do we manage, and I'll leave this to any one of these wonderful panelists, how do we manage the idea of trust with AI internally with the organization, but also externally with your supporters and the messages that you're sharing about your organization and your critical missions? So who wants to take that one?
I was just going to say, I'm not actually here. I'm just...
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. He's still in the plane. Yeah, he's force ghosting his way onto the stage. If you think about like technology as kind of like economists think about it, it is just something that shifts the production curve. I mean, that's all it is at the end of the day, right? So new technology could be something like AI. It could be a new framework that you utilize internally. It could be, switching your Marcoms team to an agile methodology, right? So it's just something that shifts that production curve, right? So if we think about it that way, and if you're thinking about technology and AI and that, I mean, what would you do with any new piece of technology, right? Where is the trust and verify approach when you're thinking of any sort of adoption when you're working through things? So I'm sure for those of us that were around at the start of Google, you're asking it questions, it's kind of giving you links back and going places, and maybe you click on like 3 or 4 of those things, and then eventually they start showing you like those cards at the top, but they're like pulled right from Wikipedia, and like, so what are they doing, right? They are doing some of that trust and verify work. You trust Wikipedia, although like when I was in school, you definitely couldn't cite Wikipedia, but like I think kids can now because it seems like it's pretty accurate, right? So what happens anytime we have new technology, right? The amount of verification that is put on the individual user to do is going to be much greater. And one of the big things I think that's happened with just large language models, kind of going back to my pet peeve, not AI, is that a product was put out into the marketplace that crossed the chasm almost immediately, right? So when we think about technology adoption, right, most things kind of stay here, like in this spot, and they never cross into like the market where most people are. And it was instantaneous in about 2 weeks that it had already crossed the chasm. And so what didn't get to happen is innovators and early adopters, those people that jump onto every new piece of technology that are more skeptical, I feel like, that do not have a problem doing more trust and verify work, didn't get any opportunity to really play around and do that kind of thing for like society as a whole, which then left a lot of like scrambling. And we're, talking about, different illusions coming up, like in our, I forgot the word they use. Hallucinations, illusions. I knew that was wrong. Thanks. And so that didn't happen, right? So this big new technology showed up. It didn't go through the normal trust and verify steps that kind of traditionally happen, like in technology adoption. And so now we're left with a product that's sitting there that causes like a lot of like fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And any of like that's a bad place to be for a new piece of technology. Those are my first thoughts, I would say.
Great. So going off of new technology, we did get a question from the audience. Which AI-powered software feature for nonprofit fundraisers are you most looking forward to, and why?
An optimistic question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the most powerful AI for fundraising is not ChatGPT related at all. It's predictive AI. It's the deep data work, machine learning AI that has been around for a long time. Like when I started studying AI back in the pandemic, because I was mostly bored looking for something to do, it was only predictive AI was the only thing going on then. And that is really about predicting donor behavior. It is kind of the same class of AI that is behind the accessible intelligence platform from Engaging Networks. It's all predictive behavior based on clicks and opens and scrolls and things like that. I think for fundraising, for sure, that's still the most solid piece. Generative AI probably at some point will be really great for making fundraising appeals and understanding audiences. When you can put together deep donor profile work that really gets into motivations and triggers for giving and the kinds of reciprocity and communication that supports long-term engagement. And when you can put that together with your actual data, that is I think that's sort of the holy grail that's out there at somewhere. But that's particularly fundraising. I think what other communications, marketing, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say anything that makes the technology more invisible to the user. I think right now with any user interface, anything that's complex, so if you look at like ad platforms, if you look at some parts of Engaging Networks, or some of the tasks that we have to do to integrate or implement the strategies that we know are the right strategies, the right approach, the personalization, the segmentation, the conditional copy. All of those things are barriers for us to bring improvement or advancement to our fundraising, and they take human capital and potential for an education and training for us to break those barriers. As if AI is helping those things become more invisible, and these platforms are more utilities for us to use, I think that's going to be a benefit for fundraising.
I'd say mine's on the same thing where it's thinking about like productivity gains for individuals at your organization. I'm sure there are like, and when kind of, George said and everybody like chuckled about like you're secretly using it's the things you're probably secretly using it for are the productivity gains, right? Where it's like, oh yes, every week I have to do this like report thingy and I have to download some stuff and then compile it and run some macros and remember that some ifs formula that I forget every time. And instead it's like, oh yeah, I can take this and the problem with that is like maybe you're putting like business data into like a free version of like a large language model product, and that's like going to training data, which means it's exposed, right? So like the problem, and that's what kind of comes to like the leadership problem, right? Like leaders aren't empowering their people to use how they have to. But I think productivity gains are the place that like I really think about as the kind of like the stepping stone, because it's individually based, versus if it's something that is going to be like exposed to like a supporter, you may have a higher level of like trust but verify. But if you're just asking it to like help you with like some like market-based research and it's something that you can verify more easily, you're going to be much more responsive to utilizing it.
Yeah, and I think it was Charlie last year who had mentioned she was uploading all of her internal documents so that way members on her team could just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, who do I contact to talk about X? Or can you summarize this policy document for me? Now, they worked out all their security stuff before she went ahead and did that, but it is helpful in that regard. And speaking about the helpfulness of it, we had a question come in that says, wouldn't AI be beneficial for fundraising and digital marketing campaigns? ? Why would it run our organizations over? So I think we talked about the benefits, but I am curious to talk about why would it run our organizations over?
One of the things I want everybody to pay attention to in terms of the train that's coming down the track is search. A lot of our organizations really rely on paid and organic search being a large percentage of what drives traffic, engagement, and fundraising for our organizations. And now that there are AI overviews in search, it's predicted that we may lose between 20 and 60% of organic traffic to our websites. I ask everybody here, go run that calculation. What does that mean for your fundraising? What has happened is Google's decided that they're going to monetize attention. Attention is the most important thing for them. It's their printer ink, right? It's the thing that generates them the most money. Well, search results used to drive attention to your websites, and Google is saying, we're going to keep that attention now. We're going to take your data, we're going to present it to the user in our interface, and there's no need for them to go to your website. This is happening with Google. It's happening with Bard and Bing Search. Perplexity and Arc Search are two entrants to the market. And, they say, oh, no, this is going to drive more traffic to your websites. But if the answers are coming and it's not through your website, there's no data to support that. And so the ad networks and ad buyers are predicting about $2 billion in lost revenue over the coming years just because we're going to see a plummet in search. So I'd be aware of that. I'd be aware of that in terms of your decisions around investments. I'd be aware of tracking that going forward. That's the thing I'm concerned about. That's the thing that I'm paying attention to. Is it's where else is that going to materialize?
That made me think about owning your lists, cultivating true, genuine relationships with your donors and supporters, really getting into the personalization of that. That's what I was thinking. But it looked like Ben wanted to say something. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, so for 20 years, so for the majority of most of our like career, lifespans for most of us. Maybe for you. Yeah, fair enough. Google has been, and we can say search, but it's really Google, has been the portal to the internet for consumers. I mean, that is a fact. And 5 years from now, Google will no longer be the primary portal for the use of the internet. And that is just
1 year.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, people, I think, maybe going and using like a Gemini product inside of that, right? So it still kind of counts, but yes, not in the same way, right? And so while we kind of have like the optimist, and like more of like the pessimist, like me sitting here in the middle, my thing is like, well, like, what are you going to do about it? And what I see is a lot of people just like sitting on their hands, unfortunately. and they're not doing things, and its senior leadership isn't being responsive to like what's happening, and like that's frustrating to me, right? And what I don't want to see is a lot of nonprofits do what they did during kind of the productivity and information age, which is kind of like there were a few that did some early work, but they kind of sat around and waited to see like what was going to shake out and happen. You had 50 years to like adapt. What if you only had 5 years to adapt to the digital age, right, that we're entering into? Like, what would you do differently right now? And I think that kind of energy is necessary and needed. And I think the pessimistic view like drives that. And I think the optimistic view gives you like a path forward, which is exciting from my perspective.
We need a healthy dose of anxiety to really drive this. But I see a question coming from the audience is, what happens when there is no more human-created content to feed into AI models? Is AI plateauing? Quite the curveball we're talking about here.
Great question.
I've seen that kind of point. I don't know. I think that what I have heard is that like all of the readily available libraries of information that we've built up over decades and as well decades of internet use, that a lot of that has been tapped into. But I think there will continue to be human created content as we're using it. I don't actually know.
Yeah, the basis of this comes from a concern that if there's no incentive to create, then why would you, right? If your work, if your intellectual property is just going to be added to an AI database and regenerated for everybody to have in any version of that they would like, what's the incentive for people to create? And I think that we all understand that that's just not how things generally work. But there is behind this is like the idea that we are trying to make a living off the things that we create and work. And if that becomes harder, the marketplace for that becomes less, people are going to be affected. And what I would say is that this is another example of wealth transfer. This is the gig economy. This is Uber and organizations that are seeing a place in order to, again, move production, but out of the hands of the people who control it. And so, this is an issue. And if you're feeding the algorithm just AI generated content, it's going to get worse. It's like rendering the video, or upload a video to YouTube, download it, upload it to YouTube again, download it, upload it to YouTube again, and see what you get. You get a much worse video. So yeah, that is a general concern.
And the other thing that I'll just say is, I'm so sorry, I cannot remember the author's name, but someone in the last 3 years, he wrote this book called the Gutenberg Parenthetical. And he makes this argument that really we've lived through the last 4/500 years we've lived through has actually been the only time during humanity's existence that the primary way of sharing information was textual. Everything before that was always oral, right? And the direction that we're going back to a model that isn't going to be based off printed text, right? And so, but that's just that is what we know. Like everyone in this room definitely has some kind of education that was primarily text-based, and that was how we learned. But the argument that I can't remember exactly what his credentials are, but what he argues is that was just this parenthetical time, this 400 or 500 years that we just happen to be at the tail end of. That probably our kids' their reliance on text as the main medium for knowledge acquisition and sharing is also de minimis, right? And so if that's the case, then something like a large language model that has actually captured the last 500 years of this, parenthetical that we've been in is exceptionally valuable if we want to be able to switch that in thinking of in a multimodal way, take that text and transform it into a way that, individuals in the future are actually going to have an easier time kind of learning from this interesting moment that, we just happen to be at the tail end of. Just as something different.
I have one more thought on that, because I think what we've seen a lot in the kind of discussion around the way that AI is sucking up all the available data has been around building more and more powerful models, and building models that are, by their measures that they're using, able to be, more and more intelligent by these evaluation models. But that's really just one direction that AI develops. It's into that powerful thinking thing, and I think. it will shift when there isn't a lot of new data to put into it. Then it starts being driven more by how people are using it, and so the training, the reinforcement learning. So my hope then is that as we kind of shift focus away from sucking more and more data in, that the focus of AI development becomes more focused on how we're using it and how it's better using that data to do the kinds of calculations, the kinds of outputs and things that we want. But I think they're still chasing the more and more data.
Great. So I know we're getting close to time. So we'll take this last question from the audience to close out on an optimistic view. Why do you think predictive AI is improving digital fundraising more than the work that's been done before it came along? Who wants to take that?
I think that it can and will. I don't know that the answer is at this point 100% always yes. It is, well, two things. One is that we're all really good already in fundraising at doing predictive analytics, advanced RFM segmentation, all this stuff, and we have the economic models that drive that. So predictive modeling is already pretty good in the fundraising field. Where predictive AI can and is expected to get an edge is that it is iterative and it keeps learning. So it may not start out to be as powerful as it can be, but as you iterate through it and as more and more nonprofits get on board and use it for different campaigns, it builds its knowledge, and it will continue to become more powerful, and then will expect it to probably far exceed what our traditional predictive analytics do.
That's great. And then with all these changes and all the positive, optimistic things that come along with it, how can we prepare the workforce for these changes? Perhaps this is a Ben question with digital transformation?
Yeah, I think, so what I would say is if you're a leader and you're in your nonprofit, I would think very hard about when your staff is bringing you AI recommendations and tools and things like that. I'd use the framework I really like is thinking about decisions as, is this decision a one-way door decision or a two-way door decision, right? One-way door decisions are decisions that you walk through the door and you cannot walk back out, right? Mm-hmm. So two-way door decisions are ones that you can walk through and you can walk back out, right? So that's where I want, if I'm thinking about my workforce, I want to be letting folks make two-way door decisions. They can walk through, do an experiment, see how it works, come back, collect results, and make decisions. Versus like, hey, okay, we're just going to buy Gemini for Google because we're a Google workspace and like this is what we're going to use, right? That is a one-way decision. Like you have, put the credit card down, you're being charged the thousands of dollars a month like to use that, and it's very hard to like pull out of that, right? So as we think about like how these AI changes in the workforce, try and see if you can actually take a one-way door decision and make it into a two-way door by decreasing the risk and running an experiment instead.
Get together, talk on a regular basis, have a 1-hour meeting once or twice a week, bring an article that everybody can read and share and talk about AI, and just start having those conversations. If you're not already doing that, or you haven't formed a working group in your organizations, or you're not in some sort of casual, Slack or Discord talking about it, try to find that. There's a lot to talk about. So yeah, and find me if you have a hot take on AI. I'd love to hear it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming here. George, Ben, Ryan, it's been great having you. And give them a round of applause.